Yeah, good evening to you all and welcome to the lecture on law of sea and maritime law. This is week 4, lecture 1. So, in the previous lecture, we started the discussion on the disputes between Bahrain and Qatar and what was the historical reasons for that dispute and for what reason the matter was now with the International Court of Justice. And the first thing the parties they were asking was regarding the jurisdiction. So Qatar has invoked the jurisdiction of the International Court, and this was challenged by the Bahrain, to which after the documentary evidence and as the treaty was existing between the parties, the treaties, by treaty I mean with the Saudi Arabia and then the British people, they have mediated also because of their own interest. And after British people, it was Saudi Arabia that mediated to resolve the dispute between them. But there was also a condition that if Saudi Arabia could not succeed in resolving the dispute, then the matter can be now dealt with the International Court, to which both the parties have agreed at that time. So there was no much question left with regard to why the matter was now with the International Court. The first issue was when talking about Al Zubaira, so whether this Al Zubaira belongs to Qatar or Bahrain, to which Bahrain was claiming that this Al Zubaira belongs to Bahrain. Reason being because it says that the Naim tribes of Bahrain, they constantly have been, long time back, the Naim tribes of Bahrain, they constantly have been shown, they have influenced this region. But they have not been able to make majority settlement. So they were living here at Al Zubaira as a minority community. However, the Bahrain was making claims that since the Naim tribes are living in this place, so and they have influenced this place, so therefore this region belongs to Bahrain, which was not actually accepted by the court even. Then is the second point, that is turning to the Hawar Islands, which is the most crucial point here, not only from the perspective of Bahrain and Qatar dispute, but also from the perspective of the law of sea. So firstly, let's give a look to it. What do we mean by the Hawar Islands, or where the Hawar Islands are located? So first picture about Hawar Island is this. You see here, this is Hawar Islands, and actually they are quite closer to Qatar, but they are governed by Bahrain. And Qatar always say that these islands belong to them, that is the Qatari kingdom. But Bahrain has always claimed that Hawar Island belongs to Bahrain because they have always been in control of the Bahrain. So let's see the other maps regarding the Hawar Islands. This is the sole map of Hawar Islands, you can see here. And down there are small islands. One of them is Janan, Had Janan. There is another Janan. So there are two Janan islands down to the Hawar Islands. Then another picture of this, you can see here Janan and Had Janan. It's a better map here. This is Persian Gulf in between the Bahrain region and the Hawar Islands. And this is Qatar. So this map is even more better when we are discussing all the maritime boundaries between the two countries. So how the maritime boundary exists? Now you see here, this is the maritime boundary, and this Hawar belongs to actually Bahrain here. From the boundary itself, it's very clear that this belongs to Bahrain, although the claims are made by this Qatar or Qatari kingdom. All right, so this is one very crucial map here, and this is Saudi Arabia. There is another map, let's see, and this is the one. So if you see from this perspective, where is the Gulf of Bahrain? This is the north of, let's say, Gulf of Bahrain and south of Persian Gulf, and here are the Hawar Islands. All right. Okay, so let's continue about the discussion on Hawar Islands. Yes. So we go to the historical background about this island. The court stated that British government decision in 1939 that those islands belong to Bahrain did not constitute an arbitral award. So the British people has also accepted that Hawar Islands, they are part of the Bahrainian kingdom. And actually, before the British people arrived to that place for the oil exploration, they could see control of Bahrain over this Hawar Islands, and at that time, Qatari kingdom never contested that why the Hawar Islands are part of the Bahrain kingdom, despite the fact that they are closer to the Qatar. So the status quo was maintained even at that time, and it was only later on that Qatari kingdom became ambitious. It's not simply ambitious, but also for the security region. Plus, they after finding that it's all that region is does have the great potential for oil and natural gas, and also for the pearls. So they wanted to make claim that to any extent they get control over this region will be very beneficial for them in economic terms. So that were the reasons why Qatar government put forward its claim. However, the court stated that British government decision in 1939 that those islands belong to Bahrain did not constitute an arbitral award. So at that time, when the British government has affirmed the claim of Bahrain that the Hawar Islands belong to Bahrain, it was not based on any arbitral award. Arbitral award means it was not based by any judicial process. They are both the parties, they were brought before, and both the parties, they put forward their evidences for their claims, and then it was finally, it was not like that. But it was simply one-sided decision, but that was again based on the evidence that the Bahrain kingdom was controlling the Hawar Islands, but did not mean that it was devoid of the legal effect. So, and then the treaty was signed on this basis also. It noted that Bahrain and Qatar had consented to Great Britain settling their dispute at the time, and found that 1939 decision must be regarded as a decision that was binding from the outset on both the states, and continued to be so after 1971. So when at that time British people, they affirmed the claim of Bahrain, Qatar also agreed to it. So the Qatar agreed, and later on when the British people left, then also the position was same. But after this 1971 onwards, the Qatar kingdom, they changed their stand, and now they wanted that the Hawar Islands should be their part of their kingdom. Now, in reply to this, what the court has stated, the court observed that the British decision of 1939 did not mention Janan Islands, which it considered as forming a single island with Had Janan. Now, it's very important to be very careful here. I repeat this, the court observed that the British decision of 1939 did not mention Janan Islands, which it considered as forming a single island with Had Janan. It pointed out, however, that the letter sent in 1947 to the rulers of Qatar and Bahrain, the British government had made it clear that Had Janan is not regarded as being included in the island of Hawar Group. So, Hawar Group of island, that was affirmed by the British people that they belong to Bahrain, but not Janan and Had Janan. Now, what are these islands, Janan and Had Janan? I again get back to this map. Here you see, this is very important. Yes, this is Janan and Had Janan. And when the British people have affirmed the claim of Hawar Island, that is this part of the island, to the Bahrain, they excluded this, Janan and Had Janan. So since this part was excluded and this was given to Qatar, this part was given to Qatar by the British people. So based on this claim that actually this Hawar Islands and Janan and Had Janan, they are of the same group. They are of the same group of islands. That means geographically they are same. So on that basis, Qatar is the rightful claimant of this. So that was the claim of the Qatar. But keep in mind what the British people had done. They have accepted this part for Bahrain, but they excluded this part for the control over Bahrain, and only they accepted Janan and Had Janan for Qatar. They have not stated that they are a group of the same island or not. So that was one very crucial point here to be noticed. The court stated that British government decision in 1939 that those islands belong to Bahrain did not constitute an arbitral award, but it did not mean that it was devoid of the legal effect. We have done this. Come to this. The court observed that the British decision of 1939 did not mention Janan Islands, which it considered as forming single island with Had Janan. It pointed out, however, that in letters sent in 1947 to the rulers of Qatar and Bahrain, the British government had made it clear that Janan Island is not regarded as being included in the island of Hawar Group. For all these reasons, the court concluded that Bahrain has sovereignty over Hawar Islands and cannot uphold Qatar's submission on this question. So, finally, what was the court's point of view with regard to Hawar Island? That Hawar Islands belong to Bahrain, although their proximity is closer to that of Qatar, but Qatari Kingdom or the state of Qatar, but they are basically part of Bahrain, and therefore Qatar's claim could not be entertained. The conclusion thus reached by the court on the basis of the British decision of 1939 makes it unnecessary for the court to rule on the arguments of the parties based on the existence of an original title, effectivity and applicability of the principle of utit positit juris to the present case. Now, this is another principle of international law that need to be understood here. So, the court reached to the decision that what the British people has decided with regard to Hawar Islands, that must be accepted as the original title. It is unnecessary for the court to rule on the arguments of the parties. Therefore, there is no point for the court to accept whatever or to give another ruling based on the arguments of the parties, based on the existence of an original title, effectivity and applicability of the principle of utit positit juris. Now, this principle has a meaning that when the colonial system was over and colonies were liberated, so those countries or the colonial masters, the way they have drawn the map and diversified, or let's say they have made the boundaries between different nations, that should be accepted as it is. So it should not be that after the colonialism is over and whatever the boundaries have been drawn between the two nations, they should be redrawn or they should not be accepted by the countries who have got independence. So for that reason, utit positit juris, this principle was applied in this case, that as the way the British people have left, and at that time, since the parties have agreed to the decision of the British people, that should be respected. And if it is permitted that the colonies that get liberation, they are now trying to redraw their map and they are trying to resettle their geographical boundaries between the nations. So that will create a very chaotic scenario. And I would like to quote here the example. If we see the map of Africa, so most of the countries in Africa, they are divided to the straight lines. And that division is done by the countries those have colonized Africa. So if the African people, they start waging the war or they start making the claims that their boundaries should be redrawn, so that will be a great mess. And actually that does happen, and many African nations, they do have this grudge in their mind that the boundaries that were settled by their colonial masters, they were not the actual territorial division. So that is one reason that many places in Africa faces the civil war. But international law, it is not ready to accept it. So international law states that whatever boundaries were drawn between the parties at that time, that should be respected, and as it is respected also by the international law. So here is the map of Fashat Diblal. We have discussed this yesterday. Fashat Azam, they are all the shoals. The court considered that the British government in so doing had provided an authoritative interpretation of its 1939 decision, an interpretation which revealed that it regarded Janan as belonging to Qatar. So the islands that are south of Hawar Islands, there are two islands that are south of Hawar Islands, they are Janan and Had Janan. So to whom they belong? They belong to Qatar. I again get back to this. This is Janan and Had Janan. Now, since this belongs to Qatar, therefore the claim that is made by Bahrain that it should have one single line territorial boundary through this water bodies, that could not be accepted, because you see here, if this area entirely goes to Bahrain and this goes right from here on to on, so how the ships belonging to Qatar, ships belonging to Saudi Arabia, they will get the passage. So that means they will have to rely upon the consideration of Bahrain. And then when these two islands, that is Janan and Had Janan, they are also at close proximity to Qatar, and then they are also close proximity to Hawar Islands that belong to Bahrain. They also will be claiming the territorial water area. So therefore, a compromise has to be made instead of going by the one straight line, drawing the boundaries of Bahrain all across this Persian Gulf area and the other water bodies. The court then turned to the question of maritime delimitation. It recalled that international customary law was applicable law in the case and that the parties had requested to draw a single maritime boundary. In the southern part, the court had to draw a boundary delimiting the territorial seas of the parties' area over which they enjoyed territorial sovereignty, including seabed, superjacent water and superjacent aerial space. Now, what was the claim? The kind of boundary they were claiming, I just show you the picture. This is the kind of boundary they are claiming. So you see here, so they want one straight line like this. It should be all together. But how is this possible? You see, this claim, if this claim sustained, then how the passage will be drawn for, the route will be drawn for the ships. So that is the point here. The court then turned to the question of maritime delimitation. It recalled that international customary law was the applicable law in the case and the parties had requested it to draw a single maritime boundary. In the southern part, the court had to draw the boundary delimiting the territorial seas of the parties' area over which they enjoyed territorial sovereignty. Now, the territorial sovereignty includes the seabed area, that means the natural resources, both living and non-living, they become part of the country that is controlling the territorial waters. Then the superjacent water, that is the water above that seabed area, all the vertical water area that is covered. Then superjacent aerial space, which includes the air space for the passage of aircraft also. So all that means if any foreign aircraft has to pass through that superjacent area, then it need to seek the prior permission from that coastal state. In the northern part, the court had to make delimitation between the areas where the parties had only sovereign rights and functional jurisdiction, that is continental shelf and exclusive economic zone. So for the northern part, let's give a look at this part. It was easy for the court to draw the boundary, but for of it where we have discussed this was more complicated, because there they had to decide very effectively what is the extent of jurisdiction of the Bahrain and Qatar without much of the confusion, and not simply these two countries but also the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Whereas for the above north, there was a more of the open space, that is the Persian, that gets broader here. So the division of contiguous zone and the other broader areas across the sea is more easier to be divided between the countries. But whereas here it is quite narrow. Therefore, the division between the two countries becomes more complex. Bahrain had claimed to have sovereignty over the islands of Jazirat Mashtan and Jalid, a claim which had not been contested by Qatar. As to Qatar Zarda, the nature of which was disputed, the court held that it should be considered an island because it is above water at high tides. The court added that activities which had been carried out by Bahrain were sufficient to support its claims over the sovereignty over that island. Now let's see where is this Jalid and Jazirat Mashtan, these two islands. Now firstly, these two islands were not considered by the other countries as island because they remained submerged for the large period of time. But it was decided by the court, Jazirat Mashtan and Jalid, a claim which had not been contested here by the Qatar, but what was decided by the court. Now this was brought into the light for drawing the territorial boundaries. This existed. So what is the status of this Jazirat Mashtan and Jalid? Therefore, based on its geographical status, only the territorial waters between the countries can be decided. Since it remains above at the high tide also, therefore it was considered an island. Let me show you where is this Jazirat Mashtan and Jalid. This is the place. This is Jalid and this is Jazirat Mashtan, and these are the Hawar Islands. Now these islands, they are very, very small and they remain partially submerged, but surprisingly they remain above waters during the high tides also. Now that is one of the primary conditions when we state whether this during high tide, whether we have to state just when we state that this particular land body is island, then it must be above the water level throughout the year or the maximum part of the year, and mainly during the high tide also. So with regard to this Jazirat Mashtan and Jalid, they remain above the sea waters. Now you see when the lines will be drawn, and now the claim, firstly we need to understand the claim is for this is made by Bahrain, and there is no adverse claim made by Qatar for this. So when the territorial water boundaries are supposed to be made, then this area will be considered as part of Bahrain, and any line that is drawn to this region, that is covering this Hawar Islands, it will be drawn like this, and now it will cover or it will actually be away from these two islands, Jazirat Mashtan and Jalid, leaving the space, leaving the wider space for Bahrain's territorial waters or the contiguous zone, or the territorial waters and contiguous zone belonging to Jazirat Mashtan and Jalid. And the transit passage will be drawn separate from these waters, because that should not interfere the rights of that of the Bahrain. So here the Bahrain got the rights over this area as an island. Very important here is that what will be the effect if this gets the status of island? That means these islands will have their own territorial waters. If had they been not granted the status of islands here, then they would not be having the territorial waters separate than that of the Bahrain's territorial waters. Then the line would have been like this. All right. And this could have been then declared as a shoals or partly submerged land bodies without having their coastal line of their own. But now, after being declared as an island, they will have their own coastal line, and the passage for the transit passage from this area will be drawn keeping in mind the rights of the parties or rights of this island also. The court added that the activities which had been carried out by Bahrain were sufficient to support its claim of sovereignty over the island. Jazirat Mashtan, now what is the class of those islands? They have been again put in a separate class in the geographical demarcation. Class T, hypsographic, in Minarat Juzur Hawar, Minarat Juzur Hawar, Bahrain, Asia, with front code of Africa in the Middle East. That is their geographical location. With regard to the low tide elevations, the court, after noting that international treaty was silent on the questions whether those elevations should be regarded as territory. Now, what are the low tide elevations? That kind of landmass area that remains submerged during the high tide, but it is seen or it is visible as the land body when there are low tides or when the water has receded. So what should be the status? That definitely cannot get the status as that of an island. But then, as it has been declared that such areas can have the potential of petroleum, can have the potential of pearls, therefore, for deciding the rights of the coastal state, we need to give some indication to that area, or we need to make some demarcation for that particular area. So the court in this case has not taken that issue in depth, but what the court has decided and how the court has decided that part of a partially submerged area that lies between Bahrain and Qatar. So here, with regard to low tide elevations, the court, after noting that international treaty law was silent on the questions whether those elevations should be regarded as territory, found that low tide elevations situated in the overlapping area of territorial seas of both the states. As stated to you now, that it was all across both the sides, Qatar and Bahrain. But then how we draw the boundary could not be taken into consideration for the purpose of drawing the equidistance line. That was true of Fashat ad-Diblal. Now, what is the low tide area? It is one of that famous is Fashat ad-Diblal. I'll show you the map here of Fashat al-Diblal. This is the Fashat al-Diblal, and this is Fashat al-Azam. So you can see this is not continuous straight line. These are the spotted line drawn. All the spotted line here are of low tide areas. Fashat al-Diblal, which both the parties regarded as low tide elevations. The court then considered whether there were any special circumstances which made it necessary to adjust the equidistance line in order to obtain the equitable result. But now the question was how to divide this or between the two. In the northern part, the court, citing its case law, followed the same approach, provisionally drawing an equidistance line and examining whether there were circumstances requiring an adjustment of that line. So what the International Court does firstly, before finally deciding the matter, it will draw a temporary line to see whether the passage of the ships through that line does work or does function practically, or both the parties, they can maintain the restraint if this portion is given to this party and the other portion is given to that party, or there is a transit passage drawn in between the regions of both the parties. So practically whether they are comfortable with it or not. Not that they just for the sake of making their claims, they are raising the issue, but what is practically feasible. So that court always consider prior to reaching the final conclusion. So similarly here also, prior to drawing the final lines covering that low tide elevations, it firstly draw the provisional lines and was observing the functionality of that, the demarcation line and the practical suitability of that provisionally drawn demarcation lines, and examining whether there were circumstances requiring an adjustment of the line. So further, it was also under observation whether there are some special circumstances that need to be considered for making further deviations or further adjustment from the lines that are drawn. Now here what the court stated, the court rejected Bahrain's argument that the existence of certain pearling banks situated in the north of Qatar, which are predominantly exploited in the past by Bahraini fishermen, constituted a circumstances justifying a shifting of the line. Now what was the claim in this regard made by the Bahrain? I get back to this map again. Here you see all this area and also this area where it is north of this Qatar. So Bahrain made the claim that these are the special circumstances for drawing the map you see here. This is Fashat al-Diblal, north of the Qatar region. Okay. So they said that there are special reasons why this area should all belong to Bahrain. That historically the fishermen from Bahrain, they have been using this for catching the pearls. So therefore it has been under the control of the Bahraini fishermen. This was the claim made by Bahrain for this low tide elevation area, but which was not accepted by the court in this very case. So let's see here what in the northern part, the courts, I think the case law followed the same approach, provisionally drawing an equidistance line and examining whether there were circumstances requiring an adjustment. So the court consider whether there are circumstances for further deviations or further making change in the provisional lines that are drawn. Now, seeking this opportunity, Bahrain made its claim, to which the court rejected. So the court rejected Bahrain's argument that the existence of certain pearling banks situated in the north of Qatar, which were predominantly exploited in the past by Bahraini fishermen, constituted a circumstances justifying a shifting of the line. After those mediation efforts failed, Qatar instituted proceeding before International Court of Justice in 1991, submitting to the court the whole of the dispute and asking it to draw a single maritime boundary between their respective areas of seabed, subsoil and superjacent water. Now, realizing that Bahrain is not able to reach an agreement, Qatar then finally sent the matter to the International Court of Justice in 1991 for the court to draw finally the maritime boundary through which it can be decided what is the seabed area of Qatar and what is the seabed area of Bahrain. Likewise, what is the subsoil area and superjacent water of these two countries. So I thank you very much for being part of this discussion, and thank you very much for giving your time to these lectures. Thank you very much.